Good morning. For the first time in a while, we can see a little bit of Mount Hermon. A little bit vaguely, but I haven't seen it for a long time because for the last couple of weeks we've just had very heavy haze each morning. And the sun appearance was much later. Today there's hardly anything on the horizon. And we can see the sun very clearly immediately. Normally it would have to rise quite a few degrees more before it became visible, unless we got a little smile through the clouds, as we did on occasion. So here we can, at least I can see with my eyes without the camera, I can see there in the center of the screen, you can see a little bit, I think, that shade in the very center of the screen beyond the hills behind the Mount of Beatitudes. You can see a little bit of grey there in the very center. That's Mount Hermon. So let's stroll a little. Since we're back to the afternoon schedule for masses here, I have a little less pressure this morning. So we can walk a little further, hopefully. Today we have a very big celebration. So the normal cycle of readings is altered. But you can obviously make up what we miss. Hey, this is the first time in a long time I haven't seen the Mississippi running. Our stream here. Oh, there's water down there, but it's not making noise, so it's very quiet. So the water is still running, but... Oops, sorry about this, people. Trying to adjust the zoom with the very... Come on. Let me do this another way here. Now there you can see the water flowing. But it's much weaker than we've been used to seeing. So many nice spots in nature. How many people do you know who are called Peter? How many people do you know who are called Paul? They must be among the most common names. I would say Mary beats them all in frequency, but that's just a hunch. And my first name, Eamon, isn't that very common. It's an old Irish name. And then we have other names. Coleman as a first name, not so common. I took that name for confirmation because an ancient Saint Coleman, probably in the 800s or 900s, lived in our area. In fact, a pathway he used to use ran beside our farm and probably across our farm, even though there was no evidence of that part, but it was the logical thing. Because of flooding, he had a hermitage in the hills behind where I lived. A monastery was still standing, at least ruins of it, a big tower and church ruins in Kilmacdua. But the names Peter and Paul, I mean, how many people are called Peter and Paul? In the different languages as well. So many. And today we celebrate what God did in their lives. And that's the big key here. When we accomplish things, somehow we call them ours. And for sure they are. The doctors study very hard, many years to be good doctors. And then with many more years and even decades of medical practice, they become really experts. Oh, we got lots of crows over here. They're probably doing cleanup work after all the campers. But I missed them taking off there. There were scores of them. But you can hear them. They make their presence audible. But then imagine a doctor boasting and thinking he did it, the healing. It would be a little bit too much, you know. And there's no doubt we should honor the effort that a good doctor puts into preparing, or a good lawyer to help establish causes in justice, causes in the area of justice, just in case there's a misunderstanding in the speed of saying in justice. It's not one word, it's two words. And great teachers make a big difference, for sure. On the other hand, and they study hard, they prepare all the classes hard, well, diligently, thoroughly. And they teach with great respect and great love and great competence. And they truly help people also to learn, to understand. Great teachers are such a help. Even to use these technological devices, how much help we'd need and how better I could handle this for you guys if I had a bit more coaching in this area. So there's the human element that we shouldn't frown upon, because if there's a great peach tree that produces wonderful peaches, or another one that produces pineapples, or simply apples, or pears, or any good fruit, then we're happy about that tree. And a good tree that bears fruit will be pruned to bear even more. You can see here how some people brought out the chair, the picnic table out in the water. It didn't occur to them to bring it back, but maybe their good thought was to leave it for somebody else. And they were here in the shade of the tree and their feet in the water in the hot weekend we just had. Yeah, we got lots of crows up here. So when we honor Peter and Paul, we're primarily honoring the gifts God gave them. There's a very strong teaching in our faith about since the early centuries in the church, about the role of grace, the importance of grace, God's gifts in our lives. And just as we see in creation, you know, the sun is wonderful, but the sun isn't going to say, well, I did it. I burned your skin yesterday. I gave you the energy to do the plants, you know, to give the fruit. Here you can see the moon. It's waning pretty strongly right now. At the same time, it's right across almost diametrically from the course of the sun right now. For anybody that's new, we're at the Sea of Galilee. Walking along the seashore. It's very quiet. You remember today's Tuesday, right? 2 days ago, 3 days ago, every inch of this was taken by people, by cars, by boats, by jet skis. And times of action and times of vacation, times of just empty times. I wonder what this was. Did somebody leave it, or will they be coming back? Maybe they arranged to come back here and have this space again for next week. Obviously the frame for a tent. Or maybe it got broken. So we have very powerful readings about the troubles that Peter and Paul were in, and their own helplessness with what God did in their lives. Peter was in prison, very securely held, and yet he's able to escape miraculously. He doesn't even believe that he's escaping. He thinks it's just a dream he's having. When the shackles tying him to the two soldiers fall off and he's able to get up. But there's a very interesting feature there as well, that the whole church was praying for him. Interestingly, yesterday or the day before, Pope Francis put out a little request to some people to pray a lot for him. He needs prayers. And the role of Peter in the church has always been sustained by a lot of prayer. And then those who pray couldn't really say, I did it. They would have to say, God did it. He heard my prayers. So we can pray a lot for people to be healed, and when they're healed, we can't say we healed them. But somehow Providence allows our role to be very strong. Just like he let Mary say her yes, and each of the disciples answer the call and remain faithful despite moments of infidelity, maybe even betrayal, even, we're slow learners. And the learning isn't just learning the skills of doing things, it's about learning the path of discipleship, learning to accept the mind and heart of God, of his revelation, of his intent. Sometimes we can have very fervent Christians, but they might be very belligerent towards some people. We might have, I shouldn't say they, have a hard time with rancor, go through periods of not being able to really forgive. And again, there we see how we need grace. But then the grace doesn't come normally without our openness to it, our willingness to accept it. Let's say you have a car wreck at the side of the road or just a flat tire and somebody wants to help you. And you say, no, go away. I'm not interested in your help, as you're not the kind of person I trust or I like. So it's amazing the twists and turns of our hearts and how we are open to help, open to partnership, open to goodness and support, or rejecting it. And yet in all this human frailty, you think of the temperament of Paul, Peter's temperament, and how little by little their character gets transformed by years of listening and following and being transformed by God's word and God's grace, being molded into new people, new creatures. All the weakness and fragility and impurity of the human mind and heart and soul, God is working on that, transforming us for glory. Today we're celebrating them in glory. and what they mean for the church. Imagine the word of God that Paul was inspired to write, and he couldn't say, I came up with all of that, you know. And yet he had a role because he had studied under Gamaliel. I'm sure he was up late at night writing those letters and had to overcome his tiredness and come up with understandings and explanations for difficult situations the communities were going through. So he was very invested in the letters, and yet I'm sure he would say this was from inspiration. And the impact it has in our lives is from inspiration. It's from the Spirit, inspiration. The Spirit is moving us to listen to. And it's great to see Paul, this is in the reading today, I have finished the course. I have fought the good fight. I am ending the race. And both of them were martyred in Rome. And the great gift God gave through Peter, you know. We can actually see the direction here, although now it's become hazier again with the intense light. In case you're wondering what that noise is, it's this pumping system here in this salt water main. So you have these rocks here, so this kind of providential, we're standing here at these big rocks. But actually these are about the relationship of pebbles to the same rocks when you are up at Mount Hermon and you're at the place called today Banias, which is dedicated by the pagans to the god Pan. And he's the one, the god of contradictory positions. Panic comes from there. And also, here we got a hiker on the wall here. Sabah al-khair. Boker tov. He didn't hear me, probably the noise of that pump. There we got a nice little picture now with the grassy side here, and then the road, and then the Mount Arbel, and the moon just above it. The moon is on its way to setting. So the gift of the keys. So Peter had some natural talents of leadership. He wasn't afraid of speaking out. He wasn't afraid of action. And yet he needed a lot of transformation of his heart to learn the laws of Christ's kingdom, the internal laws, the laws of suffering. He himself would end up crucified. He wanted to stop Jesus from being crucified. And then he discovered that this is the way he would give his contribution. That's what God wanted from him. And they both ended their lives in Rome, at the very center of the Roman Empire, which was the major power. And I'm sure both of them in their teenage years would have wished good riddance to Rome in all its oppression of their people. And in a certain sense, they brought riddance to the pagan aspects of Rome, at least partly. And again, it wasn't their doing, it was God's doing through them. And there are so many cases in the biblical story of weak human beings being the instruments and agents of God's doing. We think of that intervention just with the jawbone of a donkey. We think of 5 little pebbles in a sling. We think of so many accounts crossing the Red Sea. Who could boast about doing these things? In the same way, when we look at these great figures of the Christian story, it shows us that it was for us and for our salvation. But he didn't do it without us. He created us without us. But the work of salvation, he's inviting us to be involved. Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Here at the Sea of Galilee. Fishers of men, even to the heart of the Roman Empire for its transformation. As we look out today on the cultural challenges in our world, the great conflicts in understanding the meaning of life, the respect for the human person throughout all phases of life, the challenge of dealing with such diverse, deeply held beliefs and ways how we can have a cohesive society that works together. All of these challenges, let's not be afraid. Just like Peter and Paul entrusted themselves in the hands of providence, and God would do his work through them. I'm sure he did. What a mighty work he did. And how good it is for us to see these concrete people with all their own limitations and contradictions inside their persons at different moments of their discipleship. How God continues to do his work through them today. They inspire us so much. And they point out to us that there we have a role to play, a huge role. And maybe people won't recognize it. Maybe there were other huge roles at that time, and we'll get to heaven and we'll say, wow, this person did much more than that person. We won't have any trouble because we'll be so caught up in the party of celebrating God's glory and rejoicing in the salvation of so many. We'll just be thrilled. It will be one big, big heavenly joy. And so we're celebrating the rock. By the way, let me just make a comment. You see that rock back there? That's just the side of Mount Arbel. It's like a rock that big, where Peter says, hears from Jesus, you are a rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And he said it right in the nose of the pagan celebration place for the god Pan, at the headquarters of Herod Philip. So in Caesarea Philippi, that's the gospel, Matthew 16 today. And the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. This is the very big message as well today. So people, let's say goodbye. See you later, alligator. Thanks for all the notes. I just saw a couple of them briefly, and I'd love to be more in direct personal contact, but the day has 24 hours and we have lots of groups coming now, so say a prayer for everybody. See you later. God bless you. Goodbye. Do your part. Hear the call. Answer the call.